Have you ever wondered what makes a company great? Today we are going to review a book called No Rules Rules, Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention by Reed Hastings, the CEO and founder of Netflix, and Erin Meyer, a business school professor. Now, usually books done by long-term CEOs tend to be stories about their early life and achievements against all odds, and they're usually good for entertainment and inspiration purposes. But make no mistakes, this is not a story, this is a real business book, and a good one at that. In this episode, I'll cover the three main management theories behind this book and how it relates to my personal experience working for 11 different companies. Let's get into it. If you're new here, I'm Jeremy Chatelain, founder of Quickmail, a tool that helps you start more conversation by emails, which you can check out at quickmail.io. I produce a video every week about business to help you be more successful as an entrepreneur. So if you want clear and actionable business advice, consider subscribing, it's free, and you can always change your mind later. Alright, back to the subject. One thing I love when checking out a book is to look at the 1 to 2 star reviews on Amazon. Not only does it provide good entertainment value, it often highlights some counter-arguments. Here are 2 comments that jump to my eyes. Number 1. This book offers a good guideline on how to create a business culture that treats your employees like trash. And number 2, I was hoping to learn about business strategies and how they built a successful product and business. Instead, I got a book about HR policy. Well, let me start by saying this. This is probably one of the best business books I read in a long time. In fact, I read it twice and even gave a copy to each member of my team to discuss the content together. What makes it good is not so much that it is a page-turner, although it is, but mostly because it's packed with management theories as well as examples helping you understand how those theories came to life. It also gives Reed a chance to reply to counter-opinions about some principles and reframe popular beliefs. As an employee, I remember thinking that culture was just a management fad coming from the top management, and it took me quite a few years with my own company to understand that it is probably the most important tool you can have as a founder to build a successful company because of one simple word: scaling. As I like to say, we all have 24 hours in a day, and because of this, there is a limit to the number of projects we can be involved with, as well as how many people we can properly manage. On the other hand, a company culture can scale much better as long as this is used for important decisions across the company, like hiring, promoting, and letting people go. After reading No Rules Rules, it's easy to understand the impact a culture can have and how intentional you can be about it. Because one thing is for sure, you can't choose not to have a culture. You either purposely craft it or you leave it to chance. And yes, there are more than just HR policies. In fact, the book advocates against having policies in general because of their non-flexible nature, like expense policies, travel policies, and vacation policies. So what's really in this book? In essence, the book is built around 3 management core principles that work together well in order to produce the culture of Netflix. In short, the first principle is to create a high talent density environment, basically only having exceptional people working at the company. It's funny how many companies say they want the best talent, and yet they can't attract, manage, or retain them. The second principle is to have employees able to give each other feedback, to keep each other accountable, so they need minimum supervision as they can course correct each other. And finally, the third one is to remove as much red tape and control as possible to foster a deeper sense of responsibility and duty to the company. In fact, the main guideline here is summed up as act in Netflix's best interest. Leaders then shift their efforts toward providing context as to what that really means. An interesting caveat here is that those principles need to be applied in order. You need a high talent density before it makes sense to have candor, and you can't really remove control until you have candor in place. While this type of culture is clearly not for everyone, this provides an exceptional environment for high achievers to really shine, and it's not really complicated to see why. Let's look at talent density first. It's incredibly stimulating to work amongst the best of the best in the industry. Imagine the following situation. Let's say you're looking for a new job. When given the choice, you'd probably favor working with stunning colleagues over mediocre ones, if you heavily lean toward improving yourself or achieving a lot. From this book, however, it seems like Netflix primarily relies on salaries as the main lever, assuming that the highest salary is what motivates the best elements to join and stay at a company. Now, while money is a very important component, don't get me wrong, it's clearly not the main factor at play, otherwise banks will be filled with high talent, and yet, having tried 3 banks, I can tell you this is definitely not the case. I've been offered a lot of money to join BNP Paribas back in my time in London. After only a month there, I offered my resignation. Everyone was just there for the money, and the best performers were long gone. Everyone was miserable, and no one really pushed to improve the situation. When the salary is too good that you can't leave, it's called golden handcuff. Do you want your employees to just stay because of the salary? In contrast, one of the best decisions in my early professional career was to join Lionhead. At the time, one of the best video game companies in the world, despite an incredibly low salary. It has its issues, but I'll forever be grateful for the opportunity to work there and learn from my stunning colleagues. So thank you, Peter, for taking a chance on me. As we both know, I was not an easy employee by far. One day the lead producer there asked me to look around the room and told me, "You see, Jeremy, there are 20 people here. Every one of them is fantastic at what they do." Now, I didn't realize it at that time, as I thought this was a norm with a UK company. Well, I was young and naive, but boy was I wrong. It was truly exceptional, and I never managed to work in another company with such high talent density ever after. What about candor? We all know that feedback is the breakfast of champions. Yet, the number of companies encouraging honest feedback is shockingly low. Between employees feared to being hurt, managers afraid of offending people, breaking some employment law, or having to argue with HR over what can and cannot be done, it's easy to understand why this doesn't happen very often. I personally alienated many of my managers by simply running anonymous feedback forms so people could let me know what they thought of my performance and how I could improve without seeking permission first. I was slapped on the wrist many times for that, but I carried on doing it anyway because this was a personal initiative and I valued self-improvement more than my current job. Sometimes the feedback hurts a great deal, as my vision needed to realign with reality, but the pain is worthwhile as only the ego really gets hurt, and this pales in comparison to the ability to course correct, which over the years of practice leads to much better performance. From running 360 performance reviews to circle of feedback, the book is full of actionable and practical advice on how to max up candor at your company so you don't need to run with your own informal performance reviews like I did. And finally, there is freedom and responsibilities. According to Reed, Netflix is operating at the age of chaos. While this may be true, it's probably only chaos for someone who is used to a more command and control approach. Decentralized decision-making forces leaders to work on their communication skills and set context clearly, as they aren't really making the decisions themselves. This certainly speeds things up, but it's easy to see why this could spin out of control very quickly. Reed offered the analogy of a jazz band as opposed to an orchestra playing a symphony. And I think this makes sense. Of the 3 pillars, this is clearly the hardest one to find in companies, as leaders often see a deviation as a threat to their power and authority. After all, they were pretty hard to reach this status, and now they're being told that their subordinate can make decisions without them? Given good talent can vote with their feet, it's easy to see how not applying this makes it hard to retain high talent density. Allowing talent to make decisions on their own also is a fantastic way to prevent the usual problems about A player hiring B player, hiring Z player, as leader will make sure the new hires will have good judgment, or they won't succeed with decentralization of control. In retrospect, this is the main reason why I kept switching companies, as I was not given enough control over the decisions and I didn't like to have to wait for approvals. I remember at Electronic Arts while working on Harry Potter that in order to change a small detail in a gameplay, one needed to submit a request to the designer, who needed to then ask the lead designer, who in turn needed to ask the executive producer, which in turn... It's easy to see why no one goes through the trouble, and unsurprisingly, the game ended up being rubbish. But hey, it's Harry Potter, and it sells. On the other hand, giving freedom and responsibility in a low-talent environment is a clear recipe for failure. Add the inability to provide candid feedback, and you get one of those companies where nothing gets done and no one says anything. It's interesting to note that one recurring theme of the book is about maximizing creativity and innovation over error prevention. If you ever wonder why retail banks are missing on waves after waves of innovation, like cryptocurrency or neo-banking, it's easy to see that they favor error prevention over innovation. And in some industries like health or aviation, this is a good thing, as lives are literally at stake here. So I like how the book is taking a pragmatic approach about this and not saying that every company should adopt those principles. Finally, despite media claiming that Netflix applies radical management theories, those were well known in video game industry that thrives on innovation. Netflix simply discovered those principles and applied them to another more conservative industry to get an unfair advantage and got massive traction. Yet if you look at all those video games companies with all those three principles in place, you'll see that companies go bust by the dozen. So my advice will be to be careful with the survivor bias when considering those principles. I guess we'll see how Netflix is able to adapt to an unfavorable market environment in the future. There is also a whole chapter on how to handle international culture, but we will probably see an updated version in a few years as it felt more like an essay to me. There is a glaring missing point in Netflix's book, however. There is no notion of working remotely, which has its own challenge and benefits. From retaining talent to cost saving in office spaces, working remotely can help attract and retain talents, and it will be interesting to see if and how Netflix decides to adapt to these new social changes. To conclude, is this book for everyone? Probably not. Not everyone wants to win a championship. Some just want to play friendly games. That said, I would highly recommend this book to every founder and entrepreneur willing to understand more about crafting a winning culture. As a final note, let me come back to the one-star review of the beginning that complained about putting in place a culture that treats employees like trash. I personally wish I had more opportunities to join companies that gave their employees more freedom at the expense of job security. Because like a friend in a bank asked me once, do you want to have 20 years of experience or do you want 20 times 1 year of experience? So thanks Reed and Erin for such a great book, and I see you next time.